Hello, everyone, and welcome to All My Best Friends Are Digital, a podcast about video games and the stories they tell. With me is Caitlin Bailey, the pride of Southern California. How are you doing, Caitlin?
I am wonderful. How about you, Mark?
I am doing well. I must say, though, that Southern Ontario is doing its best to mimic Southern California in climate, if in nothing else. Today, we are going to be talking about video games, which is a great excuse to never leave the home, which is a practice I thoroughly endorse. We're going to be talking about what we've been playing lately. We're going to be talking about a retro game, Metroid Prime, in our gaming opinions on old school funware, GOOF, although given Nintendo's policies, some games are never really allowed to become retro because they're constantly being re-released. We will then move on to our feature game, which is Monster Train 2, To Train to Monster, and then we're going to close it out as we always do by shamelessly hyping upcoming titles in Shout. So, Caitlin, what have you been playing lately?
Okay, so lately I've been playing a mishmash of a whole bunch of things. I've continued not getting through chapters in Fire Emblem because people keep dying. I have completed one chapter, but I had to do it like 6 or 7 times. So,
woof.
I'm having a time. I played some R.E.P.O. almost without mods. I still am using the Field of View mod because I need it to not feel sick. But I've been playing mostly without mods with some more friends, and it continues to be great fun, and I constantly get clips of hilarity ensuing throughout our R.E.P.O. playing evening.
I agree with you that there should be a hard and fast distinction between accessibility mods that really should have been built into the game to begin with.
Yeah.
And then maybe almost in the same category is some quality of life mods. And then there are gameplay mods, which is catch. I'm not judging any of the other ones.
Yeah.
But to say that you've played the game mostly unmodified, I think is... You've played the game as it ought to have been released, suffice to say.
Sure,
because
yeah.
accessibility needs to be a design priority, even for indie studios. And a Field of View mod seems to be a barrier to entry for a lot of people.
Honestly, I think that enough people have motion sickness issues that I'm really surprised that something like Field of View is not default in every first-person game that ever comes out.
I agree entirely. It really should be a priority in the same way that in a number of fields, if you're doing visual design and you fail to take into account, say, color blindness, which, based on how you reckon it, might affect about 5% of the population, there are these, no pun intended, blind spots for accessibility that are endemic to almost all of these fields that are really unfortunate. And so I am glad, though, that there is a modding community ready to take up the gauntlet because it really ought to come standard everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tangent, but I remember when Starfield first came out, I loaded it up and I was excited to play it, and I was like, wait, what do you mean there's no Field of View slider? And that did it. I never played Starfield again. I believe they added one in a patch eventually, but it's like, come on, guys.
Caitlin, there are 1,000,001 stories of people loading up Starfield and then not continuing. Yours is as valid as any of the other ones.
Yes. Okay, so anyway, the main game that I've been playing this last week, I'm back on my Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail nonsense. So the most recent patch that just came out introduced a new area, which I mean, it's difficult for me to think of how to describe it except in terms of other Final Fantasy XIV things. So if you've played 14, it's kind of similar to Eureka or Bozja. Otherwise, for people who haven't played 14, it's a special area that you go to, and there's a bunch of content to do there. Tons of like battle events pop up all over the place called Fates. There's also critical engagements, which are like kind of like Fates, but they're more limited. Like you have to physically be there when it starts, and then it locks it, puts a perimeter around the area so no one new can come in, and you fight a boss.
I thought critical engagements were where your fiance negs you all the time.
I mean, that could be another kind of critical engagement.
I find it so telling that you're so deep into Final Fantasy, the only way you can talk about Final Fantasy is by reference to other Final Fantasy. English has failed you entirely. It is now a purely closed circle. It is just self-reference.
Yep.
You sound like me talking about, like, mechs. It's like, I'll describe it in terms of this other mech you haven't heard of.
So, yeah. Occult Crescent has been pretty fun so far. I haven't tried to go in solo because I don't know, there's some games I just don't like to play solo, and sometimes Final Fantasy XIV is one of those. Yeah, I've been having a fun time. I'm gathering my demi-atma, which I need for my relic weapon. I
All
need
right.
3 of every color, and I have maybe a third of the ones that I need because the drop rate is atrocious.
Ugh.
But other than the drop rate being quite bad, the drop rate was actually really good for me this week. I got like 6 of them in the space of one evening. But anyway, I've been having a lot of fun with it, just getting to hang out with friends and fight bosses and learn new stuff about Final Fantasy XIV. I admit that I haven't been playing as much since, oh god, basically since shortly after the game came out. I pretty much like log in for raids and then I log off. But this has had me actually logging in for not raids, so it's good.
After you fixed an indigenous kingdom's line of succession, everything else seems to pale in comparison.
Yeah.
Is this an update to the Dawntrail expansion? So you need the Dawntrail expansion for this to work?
Yes.
I would assume as much. And that's generally the release schedule, right? They release an expansion, and then all the new content updates are kind of folded in under that expansion pack.
Yeah, exactly.
Eminently reasonable.
Yep.
Have you redecorated the interior of your townhouse yet?
No, it is basically exactly like it was the last time I talked about the townhouse.
I mean, on the one hand, that's a shame. On the other hand, it was fabulous before, so I guess there's not a huge impetus to get it zhuzhed up because it's already plenty.
The first floor is wonderful. The second floor has needed work for about 4 years now, but I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but 2 years would not be an exaggeration. There we are.
Homeownership is a curse in real life, and it can be a curse in video games, too.
It's true. What have you been up to lately, Mark?
So I shouted this out a few months ago. I've been playing a game called Iron Meat, and indeed, I finished it. This is by Retroware. It was released last year. There's a version on Steam. There's a version on Switch. It's a cross-platform title thing. It is very, very Contra. Now, this actually caused me to think about some of the discussion we'd had last time about Void War and the line between homage or pastiche and outright theft or unreasonable degrees of copying. There are certainly some visual touchstones in Iron Meat that are extraordinarily Contra. For example, the very strange jump animation, where your soldier just forms a tight ball and circles around and the gun disappears, but the bullets still keep coming out of this little circle thing.
Yeah.
It's in point of fact a little Metroid in that way, but we'll get back to that later. Another visual element is the way I want to say crouch, but that's not accurate. Or I want to say duck, but that's not accurate either, because in Contra, they flatten their bellies to the ground, but then they bend their knees, and so their shins kind of kip up in that little way. It's very visually distinct, and anybody who's played Contra knows this. And it works exactly the same way in Iron Meat. So those are visual touchstones. But the thing is that the level design and the weapon design and the mechanisms and the overall vibe of Iron Meat is very much its own. Mm-hmm. It is, of course, similar to other run-and-guns. It hews to some of the same conventions, but it doesn't feel like a derivative ripoff. It feels like a labor of love that wishes to give nods to the classics. And so, for whatever it's worth, I think this is an example of something that's very much on the side of acceptable homage rather than derivative ripoff. Now, these are, of course, very subjective categories, and obviously Contra is a less mechanism-driven game than something like FTL or Void War, but anyway, not interested in necessarily cashing out a full taxonomy of these things, just these were some of the things I was thinking of while playing Iron Meat. As you might imagine from the title, the vibe is very much techno-body horror. So if you think of those sequences in Akira where people start exploding in vast heaps of weird viscera, strange flesh, and circuit boards, that is absolutely Iron Meat's thing.
Okay.
But it's all in a sort of retro game 2D pixel aesthetic, so it doesn't get super gross. Just gross enough.
Yeah. Okay.
When I last talked about it, I only played the demo, and the demo is a very good sequence of the train level, where at the end of it, you get to fight a giant corrupted train, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of machinery that's been taken over, so it's like, again, part meat, part metal, hence Iron Meat. One of the things that I find unfortunate about a lot of run-and-guns is that many of the best ones were coin-operated arcade games. In point of fact, my favorite run-and-gun is probably Metal Slug 3. Unsurprisingly, I'm a Neo Geo fan, so I love the Metal Slug games. Those games are great. The problem is, though, very much like beat-em-ups in arcade settings. They were designed to guzzle quarters, and when you have unlimited quarters, you lose a certain sense of the structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment the structure starts to fade away, then the challenge follows soon after. And when there's no challenge and the game then starts getting really unfair because it was designed to extract money, then things start to enter a haze of just putting in tons and tons of quarters and enemies coming at you from all sequences. I'm not asserting that the level design in Metal Slug 3 ever gets sloppy or bad. It's less exploitive than many games of its ilk, but the skill ceiling definitely skyrockets when you don't have unlimited quarters. So how does Iron Meat deal with this? Iron Meat, I'm actually pretty impressed. The number of lives it gives you per level is very well calibrated for forming a significant but not insurmountable challenge. I found myself having to replay a given level on the normal difficulty level somewhere between 3 to 8 times-ish, which is good. I had to remember certain bits, but it wasn't purely based on memory.
Mm-hmm.
There's a famous game called R.E.P.O, where in order to progress through the levels, you literally have to memorize where things are coming. And don't get me wrong, I like R.E.P.O too. But Iron Meat, you can still play it on a Twitch-based level. It's just you vaguely remember certain enemy patterns, and tricks shouldn't work on you the second or third time you encounter them and things of that nature. And so I felt I was getting better. So it gives you a sense of progression, it gives you a sense of challenge, but it is not one that is insurmountable. I haven't messed with the other difficulty levels yet. I might go back and try some of the hard difficulty levels, but I might not, because another thing that Iron Meat is great at is that they've continued to introduce new free content patches for interesting little modes. Now, one of them is very straightforward and a common one, the boss rush mode, but they've added a vaguely roguelite touch to it in that you can pick which weapons you want to start the encounter with.
Nice.
Which it's a Contra like run and gun. The moment you die, you lose your weapon, so that's not necessarily going to take you very far. Another mode that they introduced, which again was relatively low effort but high reward, high payoff, is the mirror mode, where you play every level backwards. So normally you run from left to right, but it is shockingly disorienting to run from right to left. And yeah, I've beaten this level a bunch of times before, but now it just looks different and I get confused. And so it's very well done in that sense. And I think that Iron Meat's great. I was very surprised to discover as well that another run and gun game that I've very much been looking forward to, specifically Neon Inferno, which also has a most excellent demo available, and is a very different style of run and gun, is also going to be done by Retroware. Recently, there was a release date finally announced for Neon Inferno. I was about to say Iron Inferno. Neon Meat. That would be a game. Neon Meat is a game that needs to happen. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be gross. Neon Inferno is going to come out in October. I cannot wait for Neon Inferno. I highly recommend anybody who's remotely interested in run and gun games or who's ever enjoyed Contra, try the demos for Iron Meat and Neon Inferno. They're great times. They're very well done. A lot of clever game design and a lot of attention to detail infuses these games. And so Retroware is absolutely pitching to my taste level. And I've been enjoying it a great deal. So I've finished all the levels. There's only 7 levels, but they're really well done. And as I say, you don't play them through just once as a rule, unless you're really good at the game. And I do not regret my time with Iron Meat in the slightest. In fact, I'm looking forward to the extra stuff that they've been pushing in terms of recent updates. That's Iron Meat by Retroware.
Nice. It looks awesome. I mean, I was watching the trailer on Steam and just seeing the weird meat train hybrid like kind of curl around. It's like, oh, that's nasty, but it looks really cool.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to say meat train too much because people might get the wrong impression. We don't want to get yanked from YouTube and demonetized places. I think Patreon has very specific terms of service. But if you were referring to the level where you fight a train, yes, that is a very, very good level and a very good boss. I can understand why they made that very prominent in the demo. And it just really helps to sell the sort of kind of quirky, it's got a sense of humor, but at the same time, kind of grim sci-fi aesthetic.
Yeah. As you go through, is it normal, like, you start a level and you're exactly the same every single time? Like, you have the same character, same gun, other than boss rush mode?
So you pick up gun power-ups,
Uh-huh.
which you then quickly lose, in my experience, generally because I'm not that good at it. You can, however, hold up to 2 guns, and when you die, you only lose the gun you're carrying. So not infrequently, especially for levels, when I had a certain sense of how the progression of the level went, I would pick up a weapon power-up and immediately swap out to use my normal weapon, so that when I needed it, I had a better gun that I could use for half a second before dying. As far as your character goes, yes, you're just some generic soldier dude. However, there's a whole bunch of different skins you can apply, and you can mix and match them. So it's like, okay, I want the helmet of that skin, I want the pants of that skin, I want the torso armor of that skin. And some of them are downright wacky. Like, you can have a shark head if you want. You can be a sci-fi cowboy man if you want. You can be a little demon dude if you want. So, again, a sense of humor, an attention to detail, slightly more content than you might expect from a game of this nature.
Yeah.
And one of those things that I appreciate doing. So, again, if you're going to be replaying a level 2 or 3 times, it's nice to be able to mix things up visually a little bit every time. It's like, okay, well, Sharkhead dude didn't do too well. Let's see how the cowboy does.
Yeah. You know, that statement reminded me a little bit of, that game that we played a while back where you're playing, like, prisoners.
Void Bastards.
Yes, Void Bastards. I thought it was a Void something. Okay. Then I convinced myself that I was thinking of Void War, which I knew wasn't it. So, yeah, Void Bastards.
Iron Meat, run and gun goodness. Highly recommended. Well, with that, we're going to go on to our gaming opinions on old school funware GOOF. We're going back again to the GameCube, which is a system with which I have very, very little experience, with Metroid Prime, which was released by Retro Studios, an American outfit, in 2002, although they did have some assistance from some of the higher-ups at Nintendo, including legendary Shigeru Miyamoto. This is a first-person exploration-focused game featuring everyone's favorite badass protagonist, Samus Aran. So tell us about Metroid Prime, Caitlin.
This was my first time ever playing Metroid Prime.
Me too!
Yeah, I never played it before.
Why didn't you play it? Just because you played Fusion and that was about it? Because they came out at roughly the same time.
Yeah, I want to say... So, okay, first, if being first-person, I was just like, I don't know, I don't like first-person games that much.
Sure,
and
same here.
That's kind of changed a little bit over time, but given the motion sickness issues, I tend to like, I'm not always into it. Also, I watched my husband play at least a little bit of Metroid Prime, and it looked fun, and I knew it was pretty much universally loved by all of our friends. I have no idea, honestly, why I didn't really ever even try it, but this is my first time. So anyway, Metroid Prime starts very similarly to many other Metroid games. Samus arrives somewhere, she's investigating stuff, shenanigans occur, her fancy suit gets damaged, and she starts off, with just her regular suit, chasing after Ridley on the planet Talon 4.
I keep forgetting that thing is called Ridley. It's so weird. I don't have a lot of experience with Metroid games, but I recognize the Ridley thing. And so the moment it showed up in Metroid Prime, I'm like, oh yeah, that thing. Oh, it's Cyber Ridley this time. Okay, interesting. I keep expecting Sigourney Weaver to show up and kick its ass on the basis of copyright infringement.
Hasn't happened yet. It's first person. It's very old school kind of styles controls.
I think that's being generous, but go on.
The first thing I did was try to move the camera with the C-stick. Like the right, stick, and it didn't work.
Like a fool.
Like a fool. And I was like, I'm confused. How do I move the camera? And you have to hold right trigger, hold it in to move the camera around. It's very weird.
And then, under default settings, the stick is inverted like you're flying an airplane or something.
Yeah, I changed that right away.
Oh, yeah, me too. Hardcore. But so in the default control scheme, if you want to look at, scan, shoot at anything that's slightly above your normal field of vision, and remember, this is a first-person exploration game, so yeah, that's a thing you want to do now and then.
Yeah.
You have to hold down the right trigger, hold the stick down, but make sure it's at the right level, because it's very, very analog focused. It's not like the reticle stays put. If you let go of the stick, you'll snap back to the center, which is another baffling... So far, we're at 3 baffling decisions already. Let's be frank. 2002, there are lots of control problems that are associated with 2002.
Yeah.
First-person dual-stick controls had more or less been figured out by that point, right? This is 5 years since the dual stick first person control scheme had been first introduced, and most games had figured out something kind of close to that.
Yeah.
This is new levels of weird. This is like the designers of Metroid Prime looked at the emerging standard and said, oh, okay. But what if no, and we went the opposite direction and made it really terrible in new and exciting ways? Why not? And everyone shrugged and said, okay. And it's so awful. Every time it happens, I have to remember. It's like, okay, oh, geez. It's baffling every time I have to interact with it.
Yeah, I want to say for at least the first hour, if not the first 2 hours, I would naturally go to the C-stick, and then nothing would happen. I'd be like, oh, yeah. Okay, which button?
Yeah.
Is it left? Nope. Okay, it's right. Right trigger, hold that in. Now I can move stuff around.
Why would you use the C-stick for that when you can just use it as a way to toggle different beams? That's the obvious thing you do with an analog stick, right? Toggle beams?
Yes, obviously. I did find myself wondering, I was like, I wonder if like Metroid Prime Remastered addressed this. And I think the answer might be that they added an option for it.
Yes, you can use a more standard control scheme in Metroid Prime Remastered.
Okay. Yeah. I did not play that. I played on the GameCube, so I was stuck with regular old controls.
Tellingly, one of the things they had to do in that context was adjust the difficulty, which is an explicit acknowledgement, albeit 20 years later, that with proper controls, Metroid Prime is too easy. Isn't that wild?
Oh, that is kind of funny, because, I mean, it was funny, because when I wasn't fighting the controls, the very first, like, quote-unquote boss fight, other, like, outside of the, tutorial intro area, I was having such a hard time targeting the stupid flying wasps, and they kept flying into me and knocking me off the platform, and then I'd be disoriented and not know how to get back up on the platform. I think I died 3 times, and that's probably all of my deaths that I had in Metroid Prime was on that boss, just trying to figure out, like, no, I need to spin and find the wasps and shoot them before they knock me off the platform. Anyway, that part got me a little fired up. But there's no run. So, okay, I'm starting with, I'm apparently starting with my complaints first. There's no run. Like, you can't run. There's no teleport, which, especially, so right after the first boss, I kind of lost, I don't know, I lost track of where I was going. I couldn't figure out how to get to the hive for the second boss. Eventually, I found the map room, and that helped a lot. But I was losing my mind because there's no run button, so I'm having to, like, kind of, like, Samus doesn't plod along, but she's not super fast either. So it took a while to walk around, especially with no teleport, and then realizing, like, oh, well, I'm all the way back here, and I have to get back there. I have to walk. Kind of sucked, but it is what it is.
So these, I think, are 2 somewhat distinct but related issues.
Yeah.
One of them is the overall element of backtracking.
Mm-hmm.
Games of this ilk, be they Metroid or Castlevania or anything of that, they tend to have a certain amount of backtracking.
Yeah.
And I've always said, we talked about this back when we talked about The Lost Crown in Prince of Persia, backtracking is better if the traversal feels fluid and cool.
Yeah.
I'm not going to defend it. I mean, backtracking is never great, as a rule. It's very difficult to do it well. And in Metroid Prime, not only is the traversal as a rule pretty stodgy, and Samus does feel an awful lot like a tank, this also, I think, really makes it confusing to me as to why Metroid Prime exists the way that it does. Because Samus has always had, in her other manifestations, certain characteristics. One of them is that she can jump real high.
Yeah.
And she's not super fast, but she also, like, her little 2D legs, in the earlier Metroid, she starts pinning them like mad. It's almost like a Looney Tunes character. And she's running along. And I associate her with a certain degree of verticality and a certain degree of fluidity of movement, right? The platforming in Metroid is usually a salient element of it. And there's platforming in Metroid Prime, but as you say, not only in terms of her moving around, she jumps like a tank too. She has these very, very little hops. Consequently, the backtracking feels more tedious because the movement is not particularly satisfying. And number two, it doesn't feel particularly Metroid-y whenever I think about how the movement is working.
Yeah, so I thought that the best movement, or at least the movement that I had the most fun with, was actually Morph Ball. I loved
100%.
turning into a little ball and rolling around. That was super fun.
It was amazing, and it's in third person.
Yes, and the number of times that, like, I could not judge. Okay, eventually I could, but it took time to learn how to judge whether I could make a jump or not. I had a very difficult time figuring out when to jump to get over some of the larger gaps, because you look down, you don't see your feet.
Everyone knows that first person is ideal for platforming. Go on.
Also, I kept, I would get stuck on either a corner or a little bit of geometry on the ground and not know why, just stop. All of a sudden, I'm not moving forward anymore. It's like, okay, what's going on? Like, okay, I guess I try to jump and see what happens, or I wiggle to the side and see what happens. Yeah, so movement was finicky. The worst part about the Morph Ball movement is when you had to, bomb jump into a tube. That usually took a few tries because it wasn't very easy to, direct you into the right place. But Morph Ball was still very fun.
That at least is consistent with past Metroids.
Sure, yeah.
Using the bomb to move you around in Morph Ball has always been a little finicky. I'm willing to give a partial pass to that, I guess, just because it's a series mainstay. I read a quote from one of the American program directors talking about how it took them forever to figure out how to implement the Morph Ball in a first-person Metroid game. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, the way you figured it out was by not having it be in first person. And it's the best traversal in the game. It feels the coolest, it's dynamic, it's weird, it's sci-fi. It feels more like Metroid felt in the past. Anyway, yeah. I agree with you. Morph Ball is a standout. I wish you could spend the entire game with your little Morph Ball running around.
I would play that game, yeah.
There is a Metroid pinball game where you do indeed spend the entire time as a Morph Ball.
So, I did bring up motion sickness earlier. This game, unfortunately, Metroid Prime did make me a little motion sick. I think it was better. It was better than usual, probably because I was playing on my GameCube, so I was sitting on my TV and I was fairly, far back from the screen versus computer where it's right in your face. So I managed to play for quite a while, probably 4 or 5 hours before I was feeling so nauseous I had to turn it off. So that was, both okay, I can't actually say it was a plus. I was glad I was able to play for as long as I was able to. But yeah, there's no field of view settings in Metroid Prime, which I guess I kind of understand given the age. I don't know when field of view started to be a more standard option in first-person games.
Definitely after 2002, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, okay, we call it first-person exploration game, and you might think that it's a first-person shooter. It is not. You really don't have to aim. You have to get the camera in the vicinity of where you want to aim, and then you hit left trigger.
Sometimes is a challenge.
Yes. Sometimes it's definitely a challenge. But then you left trigger and you lock on to something. Definitely appreciated that. It would not have been a good time at all if you couldn't do that, especially without, some sort of twin stick control scheme.
I definitely felt that normal combat existed exclusively to A, eat up time, or B, give you missing resources, specifically missiles, so you could get past various things. I did like the boss fights, though. I thought the boss fights were cleverly done and did a good job of playing around with their contrivances rather than running straight into them.
Yep. I rather enjoyed the boss fights as well. The regular fights were fine, I guess. And honestly, the most annoying part to me was if I had to go through a hallway multiple times, having to deal with all the tiny little bugs that would swarm around the halls. Okay, I already killed all of them. I don't need to do it again for at least 10 minutes, okay?
Yeah, that also is part of why the backtracking is tedious.
Yeah.
As a final complaint, because, look, when Metroid Prime is working, I am weak to what Metroid Prime is selling. Just exploring an alien environment and having some cool sci-fi trappings. And I really do like Samus Aran as a protagonist. I think it's pretty well done. Mm-hmm. And I will say this about Metroid. You made fun of how it's such a cliche. Something happens to Samus and her suit gets degraded. I at least appreciate that they give a token nod
Yeah.
to her losing all her abilities.
Oh, for
as
sure.
opposed to just are expecting to believe that just independently she shows up and it's like, oh, another way for me to get a missile launcher grafted onto my suit, huh?
Yeah.
Which makes no sense.
I forgot to bring all my gear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most RPG sequels expect us to believe that this main character who punched out God in the last installment now needs to start over from level 1 with a stick.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I don't think that First Person did a good job of conveying the environments, because they're good-looking environments and there's some interesting details to be had. But when it's a chore, to the extent that I'm literally sitting here thinking, there's probably a scannable point right above my field of vision, isn't there?
Yeah.
I know it. Do I feel like bothering? Nope. And then I just move on. And then, if I do scan it, and it says right at the bottom, new data entry found and entered into your logbook, I'm like, do I feel like going? Because you go into your logbook, and all the entries are in a random order, and they don't highlight the new one. It's weird.
Oh.
And so it's long on atmosphere, and there's details to be had. Like, I'm vaguely curious about, like, you read this log entry from the Space Pirates talking about the events of the first game and how they're running from the Huntress who's murdered all of them. And it's like, yeah. But then I get a new log entry that I struggled to get into my field of view. And do I feel like paging through the menu and scrolling down forever? Nah, whatever. So move on. So I feel like I'm missing a lot of that. But in terms of atmosphere, I like the environment. I like the overall maps. I don't like backtracking through them, but I like the overall setup. The level design is solid. And the sound design really is very cool. I think that they've done a great job with the music.
Yeah.
Riffing on the Metroid theme, as well as the ambient sound effects. I really do like science fiction, and I think that Metroid Prime gets a lot of those elements right. I just find myself wishing that it had either been a traditional Metroid control scheme. Like, it's weird. Metroid Prime feels like it wants to be a walking simulator so much of the time.
Mm-hmm.
In the traditional way of walking sims, first-person walking sims, you're going out, you're getting codex entries, and you're piecing them together. But it's got the interface of an entirely different game, and a weird control scheme on top of that, none of which feels very Metroid-y to me.
Yeah. The scans are interesting, because there's zero dialogue that I've run into, at least. I don't know of there being any dialogue in this game whatsoever, in Metroid Prime.
I believe Ridley said, and I quote, raw, which I think translates into buy Bitcoin.
Yes, probably. That sounds about right.
Yeah. Ridley's huge into crypto. They will not shut up about it.
It's like, come on, Ridley. Get a grip.
Seriously.
But the only way to kind of consume the story is by scanning stuff. And again, I'll give it a pass because of it being, the age it is. But all I could think of every time I scanned something was how much better that concept has gotten in newer games, where sometimes you scan something and there's a narrator talking to you while you continue to be able to do stuff. Just so much nicer and more immersive than having to read or, God forbid, open a logbook in another menu and find the thing that you just discovered.
There's a section where you find 12 totems. There's an environment where there's 12 totems, and you're told that in order to progress further in the game, you have to find all 12 of them and bring them together. And the game told me that I had to scan all 12 totems. I almost noped out right then.
You're like, nope.
Just wandering around this small area, looking up at 12 different statues just to get a whole bunch of codex entries that I don't feel like paging through. I kept playing, and I'm glad I did. There's a lot to like in Metroid Prime.
Yeah.
It's struggling against itself in so many huge ways.
Yeah. If only he'd just been able to be Morph Ball the whole time.
Yeah. Makes me really want to go and try Metroid Fusion after all this time.
Yeah. I was definitely hankering from some regular old side-scrolling 2D Metroid.
Yeah. Yeah, and Metroid Dread, maybe that too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely some inspiration for that.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Metroid Prime, despite the amount of complaining I've done, I did have quite a good time with the hours I put in. I desperately wish that it didn't make me nauseous, of course, but like you said, the environments looked really nice, the music was really good, the controls could be an issue, but
yeah,
I can understand why Metroid Prime has this, hallowed space in gaming history that it does.
I can too. Again, for all my complaints, I think you're slightly more positive on Metroid Prime than I am. I'm not supremely pro Metroid Prime.
Yeah.
But there is a lot to like in there, and it totally nails the atmosphere and it totally nails the presentation.
Yep, 100%.
So that was Metroid Prime. Before we move on, we are going to ask you to hold down the R button and gently push the L stick down a little. No, that's too much. No, okay, there we go. And we're going to have some ads. And we're back. We're now going to move on to our feature game, which is Monster Train 2, designed by Shiny Shoe, released this year. It is a sequel to, conveniently enough, Monster Train, released in 2020. Monster Train was, in my estimation, one of the first big roguelike deck builders to build on the success of Slay the Spire. It was one of the early releases afterwards that gained a lot of attention. And this is indeed the sequel. So it is a very much like its progenitor and like Slay the Spire. It is a deck-building roguelite where you have a train.
Yeah.
There are many people, among them your husband, who are very pro-train. There's been a train-heavy episode as it is.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us all about Monster Train 2?
All right. So I did not play the original Monster Train. So this is my introduction to train deck-building roguelites.
I forgot, when we started the show, you'd barely played any deck-building roguelites at all.
Yeah.
Ah, yes. Now it's coming back.
And I hadn't played Slay the Spire, and it was a whole thing.
It was a whole thing.
Yeah, so Monster Train 2 is interesting. When it starts, you have only 2 different clans are available. The Banished, which are fallen angels, which I think were antagonists from the first Monster Train. Is that right?
I played all of Monster Train.
Okay.
I didn't care about the plot then, and I certainly don't care about the plot now.
Yeah.
I think there are definitely visual similarities with enemies from the first game, but I don't know about named characters or anything like that. I couldn't tell you. I'm not down on the lore.
Okay. Well, there's the Banished, which are like fallen angels that got exiled from heaven for whatever reason. And then the dragon guys that I can't remember their name. I love them so much. All the dragons. You like the
little dragon that sneezes
napalm
God. Phlegm at people?
Yes, I love him so much. And I just think that the Pyre Gel mechanic I found to be really fun. Pyre Gel is like this stacking debuff that you put on an enemy, and for every stack of Pyre Gel, they take an additional damage, which obviously works out really well, especially if you have like multi-strike and stuff like that. But yeah, the sneezing little whelp was among my favorite cards. Yeah, you put your guys on a train. You have one hero character. Was that the case in Monster Train 1 as well?
Yeah, you had a champion.
Okay.
So there are units and then there are spells. Unlike other deck builders of its type with you only have spells as a rule.
Yeah.
Like you could classify all the things that happen in a game of Slay the Spire as a series of spells. But, you can call them different things, attacks versus abilities, whatever. But they're one-shots you play from your hand and or special buffs that you apply to yourself. In Monster Train, additionally, you have units, which are cards in your deck, kind of. But they occupy slots in a sort of deployment lane.
Yeah.
And they persist so long as they have hit points left, and if they die, they don't go back into your deck, they're gone.
Yes. So your train has 3 levels that you can put your units on, and then the top level has your Pyre Heart. Enemies will generally start on the bottom floor of the train, and then after one round of combat, they move up to the next level, then the next level, and if they're still alive when they get to the very top, they will deal damage to your Pyre Heart, and if your Pyre Heart runs out of hit points, you lose the run. The Pyre Heart deals damage, which is interesting. That's actually how I won my first run. Not my first run, but the first win I had was everything was dead, and the boss hit my Pyre Heart and took damage and died. It was beautiful.
Great.
Yeah, I've been having a really good time. I haven't unlocked everything yet. I've unlocked, I definitely haven't unlocked everything because there's so much to unlock. I have unlocked 4 of the 5 different races that you can play, or covenants, I think they're called, in Monster Train 2. I think Banished is quite fun. The dragons are really fun. I don't understand the Luna ones at all. haven't tried them too much because I saw the Luna guys have like this moon phase mechanic, and I was like, oh, that feels thinky, and I don't want to be thinking right now, so skipped that one. And then the fourth one that I got were these little mushroom guys, fun guys, and I don't want to be offensive to them, but they are very cute, like so cute. So,
You're not worried about upsetting the sneezing dragon, but you're worried about upsetting the mushrooms?
There was a story beat about them being upset because people find them cute and they are discriminated against for their cuteness.
Fair enough.
So those are the ones I unlocked. The fungi are very fun to play. I haven't yet won a run on them. I've only won a run on the dragons and the banished so far. But yeah, I don't know. I've been having great fun. I usually struggle in deck builders with knowing when I should and shouldn't add new cards, especially in Slay the Spire. I'm like, oh, this card looks cool. I'm not going to give any thought whatsoever to how this interacts with my deck. I think it looks cool. I'm going to add it to my deck. And for whatever reason, that doesn't happen to me with Monster Train. I don't know what it is about it, but I'm actually able to say, skip, just give me some money instead. I don't want a card today. So yeah, I don't know. There's been having a really good time with Monster Train. What about you, Mark?
I remember really enjoying the first Monster Train.
Mm-hmm.
Monster Train 2 isn't really doing it for me. I think it's mostly because I played a lot of Monster Train.
Sure.
And I think the formula, I'm going to... I don't mean this as pejorative as it sounds. I think that Monster Train is a more gimmicky take on the deck building structure.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the same way that Slay the Spire is just this giant pool of cards, and they all work more or less the same way in the sense that they all enter your deck and they all cycle through your deck in the same way, and there might be special keywords that differentiate them at various times. And you have to approach it far more like a traditional deck builder in the sense of bloat and synergies and so forth. Monster Train has elements of that, make no mistake. But because there's this big difference between the units you deploy and the spells that you cast in a given run, and you're really limited in terms of your units, largely by the geography of your train levels, as well as the card effects, it feels to me a little bit more like an auto-battler. A touch. Because you set up the initial circumstances, you come to an encounter with your deck, like you do in all deck builders, you do an initial deployment, which much of the time constitutes the majority of the units you're going to deploy over the course of a run.
Yeah.
And then I find, personally, you're then just fiddling around the margins for the most part. There are exceptions. I was actually very pleased to start playing around with the room modifier cards. Those I thought were really cool. And that made me feel more like I was fiddling around with things like powers in Slay the Spire. But for the most part, your starting spells are really bad, and you spend a lot of time mucking around with them, just trying to make them effective. So, for example, in the case of your dragons, and you give people Pyrogel, it really is because it's just this compound interest sense of things. Like your starting spell... You're starting with the dragons, of which you have many copies, is do a tiny amount of damage and give a tiny amount of Pyrogel. It's like, well, that card only really starts to work either as setting up for later stuff or after someone's already got 10 stacks of Pyrogel on them anyway, because 10 damage is a little significant, 1 damage is typically not.
Sure.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
Like a lot of games are basically about, these things are useless unless and until you set up the synergies. And it's all about the gimmicky interactions and the puzzle-based implications of a variety of moving parts. And for whatever reason, the formula in Monster Train 2 wasn't doing it for me the way that other deck builders do and the way that Monster Train 1 did. I was feeling the limitations to be getting in my way rather than an interesting new setup. Maybe it's because I played the first game to its relative conclusion. I probably sunk about 25 hours into it. And so consequently, much of the time, I felt like the game was forcing me to just play around with uninteresting cards. And the more interesting stuff, like the units like your champion, was just kind of... The limitations were hitting me far more prominently in those cases.
Interesting, yeah. I felt like there were times, I think, when I felt like my like those intro cards were just kind of getting in the way, or that I wasn't able to do interesting stuff after the first setup. But I generally felt like, so for example, with the Banished, one of their first spells is one that advances the character that you put it on and gives them Valor. And Valor increases their strength and also makes it so that after a battle is over, or after a combat is over, that they get armor equal to their Valor. So I had a lot of fun messing around with Fel, who's like the main Banished champion, and one of the other units I got where they both got Valor when they moved. So I was just alternating them back and forth, like beefing up the Valor. I really liked the champion upgrades that you could do, which I have no idea. I assume that's in Monster Train 1 as well.
Yes.
Although I haven't experimented with too many of them because I can't not give Fel the permanent Valor buff. So, we'll see.
I agree with you that the overall champion structure is great. And that kind of highlights a bit of why I'm a little less enamored with Monster Train 2, because your champion is more interesting than your other units and the other cards you're going to be playing, right? And I'd rather spend more time with interesting card effects and with interesting stuff. It's a little bit like how I was complaining with Lone Star, where all the cards were just so boring, they're just numbers and colors. And Monster Train 2 isn't nearly that bad. But I want to spend more time fiddling around with my champion. I felt that the champion upgrade decision that you make at the end of a major fight is among the most interesting things you do in a game of Monster Train. And I wish there was just more of that.
Yeah, I can understand that. Which covenants did you end up unlocking?
I've unlocked the same ones that you have.
Okay. Did you try the fungi?
Not a whole lot, but I remember the mushrooms being very effective in Monster Train the first.
Oh, because they're from that one, right?
Yeah, well, similar but different. They're kind of echoes of earlier effects. And I agree with you for what it's worth about the factions. They've kind of got their one trick, and you just really need to exploit that. Like, every time I played with the Banished, no matter which cards I would get, no matter how far or earlier I was in the meta progression, how many more cards had been introduced to the pool, at the end of the day, you're just leveraging Valor. You're just shuffling your dudes around so the one you want is in front, but the one behind that still got to jump to the front at the right time and all those other things. It's not an uninteresting puzzle, but it tends to be the same puzzle. And so you have these very, very gimmicky factions. And that was interesting, but it was one that I felt it a little bit stood in the way of just being able to play a little bit more impressionistically or just discover new sets of interactions. Like, I felt like the factions came with their interactions pre-made. There's a little bit more interest to me in the way that different factions interact. So if you play with the two starting factions, for example, you're dealing with Pyregel and Valor, and so it's very much everything is about compound interest. Everything. You start with low attack values, but you build up enough Pyregel, you build up enough Valor, and suddenly the character that was doing 5 damage is now doing 50. Cool. That's okay. But again, it's these preset combinations. I remember this being true of the first Monster Train as well. I think the meta progression could have gone a little bit faster.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. You really
do spend so much time with your starting cards. And yeah, you finish your first run, maybe you did really well, like Caitlin did after having beaten the game after her first play, and she's
did not
bragging. That's what you said. You were bragging about it just a minute ago. Or maybe you didn't get very far, and then you unlock like 1 or 2 extra cards for that faction. It's like, okay, great.
Yeah, that was actually a little bit of a disappointment to me, but one reason being because I think on my actual first run, I came across an event where I could pick one of 3 boxes. And the box I decided to pick was one that would give me just add a random card to each hand. So I was like, yeah, extra card? Sure, why not? Yeah.
I had that encounter 3 times. That's the obvious call, I think.
It's like, why would I do any of these other things? I don't know. But, so I did that, and I saw a bunch of cards, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I unlocked them, and I was like, oh, well, I mean, that's nice, but I've already seen it. Like, it's not a surprise. It's not new anymore.
I really do think that a lot of other a lot of the other top-tier roguelike deck builders do a slightly better job of the meta progression, do a slightly better job of letting me play around with cards. And I think that's what it is. Look, if you haven't played Monster Train, and Monster Train 2 is on Game Pass, it's really cool. It is an interesting variation on the formula. It's got some really cool gimmicks. It's got some really interesting gameplay hooks. And I was really excited when Monster Train 2 came out to play it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've just had more or less as much Monster Train as I want to have. It didn't feel too much like a progression of the genre the way the first Monster Train did.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like more of the same, which is okay. If you finished the first Monster Train and said, I could play more of this for days, this is more of this.
Yeah.
But I played about as much Monster Train as I wanted to in Monster Train 1, and Monster Train 2 has failed to rekindle the passion.
So one thing I'm curious about with respect to Monster Train 1 versus 2 is, did each, like, race or covenant, whatever they were called in Monster Train 1, did they also have their gimmick?
Yes.
Okay.
My overall impression is that the card play generally relied a little bit less on that gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was a little bit more, like, the same thing happens in every deck builder, whether it's Magic the Gathering or anything else. There is room for cards that are good just because they have great numbers. I call them stat monsters. Like, this unit isn't good because it has a whole bunch of tricks. This unit is good because it's got a good attack rating and a good health rating. And I feel like on a spectrum, obviously there's always a spectrum for these things, Monster Train 1 had a higher proportion of cards that were more like that.
Mm-hmm.
Monster Train 2 feels like, you know, contra what I just said about how it's more of the same. It's a little bit more leaning into the puzzly gimmicks of individual factions.
One of the things that I was thinking of when you were saying that is other deck builders usually have a lot more, I guess, neutral cards that are meant to work with any deck. And I'm guessing that one of the reasons here that there aren't so many of them, because you start with your train stewards. But I guess it's because you have that secondary faction. And maybe, you know, you're supposed to be able to do a little bit more mix and matching there. Which I did a lot of with, like, Banished and the Dragons. But my second win, I pretty much went full Dragons and was like, I don't care about these moon people. Like, just give me a couple of your spells and otherwise just stay in the corner over there.
Well, yeah, the moon people, I think, are a good paradigmatic instance of this sort of gimmicky, puzzly thing that I'm talking about. They have these phases of the moon, and if the card you're playing, some of them are still worth playing even when they're out of phase, and they don't get the buff. But a lot of their spells, for example, are, if the moon is full, do something cool. If the moon isn't full, do something incredibly weak.
Yeah.
And so there are ways, of course, with other abilities to manipulate the phase of the moon, Natch. There are units that can do various things, either on phase or off phase, sure. But it's a good example of the kind of interactions that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Monster Train, really glad you're enjoying it. I sincerely believe I would enjoy Monster Train 2 a heck of a lot more if I hadn't played the first one. And as I say, if you want more, this is more. If you felt you were done, you might be done.
That makes sense, especially if it's not, like, meaningfully largely changing the formula. Like, if you were done with the Monster Train, you probably don't have a whole lot to get out of Monster Train 2.
I'm sure there are Monster Train diehards that are all about it, but didn't work for me. Well, we're going to close things out as we always do with some shameless hyping of upcoming titles, aka Shout. Caitlin, what would you like to shout out for us?
Okay, so I'm going to shout out The Expanse, Osiris, Reborn. There's a trailer. I haven't watched it yet because I've been too busy. But I heard that there was an Expanse video game. And I read all of the books, and I watched all of the show, and I love The Expanse so much. So much. So, despite everything, I'm excited for this, and I'm hoping that it's at least decent.
Wasn't there a Telltale Games Expanse thing?
Was there?
Yeah, there's a Telltale Expanse game.
Oh, about Drummer. That sounds amazing. I should play that.
Okay. So The Expanse. I agree with you. The show, I didn't watch all of it. I kind of trailed off, but it's very well done. I read the first book. I am going to be shouting out a couple of patches, actually.
Oh.
So it's kind of cheating. One of them is one of the incoming major patches for NIGHTREIGN, because I've been playing a little bit of Elden Ring NIGHTREIGN. it is not really designed for 1 or 2 people. It is designed for 3 people. But at least when you're playing solo, it gives you a mild concession in the form of 1 free revive while fighting the boss. So that's something. If you're playing with 2 players, you get all the difficulty level of the 3-player version and no concessions whatsoever. And when everyone in the world said to From Software, hey, why did you design things that way? The design team just basically looked at each other for a few minutes and said, we didn't think anyone would want to play it that way, sorry. And so they're going to be patching in something for 2 players because, unfortunately, all the people that I know who are playing Elden Ring, NIGHTREIGN have their own groups, and there is no room for poor little Mark to join them.
Aww.
So there's that. With 2 players, I might be able to scrounge something together, but 3, it just hasn't been working. And playing with randos is okay. Anyway, I'll have more to say about NIGHTREIGN at a future point, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it's a little stressful with randos who are already level 1 billion and are running like crazy, and here I am with my heavily armored Birdman just panting and struggling to keep up. But such is the way of things. That is supposed to be coming soonish. We'll see. And then this is super cheating because it already came out.
Oh, Mark.
Very much like the main game, Kunitsu-Gami Path of the Goddess came out, and everyone's like, wait, what's this? There's a DLC for Kunitsu-Gami called Otherworldly Ventures.
Oh.
Which has been out for a few days. And so I am reinstalling Kunitsu-Gami. I thought this was coming out like a few weeks from now. But no, in the same stealthy manner in which the base game was dropped, there's more stuff for Kunitsu-Gami. I had a great time with Kunitsu-Gami. It was an unexpected delight. And so I'm curious to see what else there is.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm pretty excited about that. I actually need to get back to Kunitsu-Gami and finish it. But maybe one day.
Add it to the list, add it to the pile.
Yeah.
So that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us for All My Best Friends Are Digital. As a reminder, if you'd like to support us in the free media we do and get ad-free episodes, bonus content, new episodes in advance, and more, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/amfad. We're also on YouTube, where you can see the video version of the podcast. And we hope to see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach us at allmybestfriendsaredigital@gmail.com. Hope to see you again soon.